There is a moment, right after you sign your name on a contract that will change your life, when the pen feels heavier than it should, and I didn't know yet that the weight I felt that morning wasn't the pen. It was the sound of my marriage ending, one letter at a time. My name is Elena Ward. I was 34 years old, and for 11 years I had been the kind of architect who showed up early, stayed late, and said, "No problem," so many times that I forgot I was allowed to have a problem at all. I worked at Hollis & Vane, a small but respected design firm in Belhaven, the kind of mid-sized city where everyone in your industry eventually knows your name, for better or worse. I designed spaces where people were supposed to feel safe, restaurants, boutique hotels, community centers, and somewhere along the way, I had stopped designing that safety for myself. I want to tell you that I was miserable the whole time, that I saw it coming, that I was already halfway out the door. But that would be a lie, and this story doesn't work if I lie to you. The truth is, for most of those 11 years, I loved my husband. His name was Derek Calloway, and when we met, he made me laugh so hard, I once had to pull my car over. He used to leave notes in my lunch bag. He used to tell people at parties with his arm around my waist, "My wife is the smartest person in this room, and everyone here knows it." I believed him. I built a life around believing him. So when the email came in, the one from Vantage Hospitality Group offering me lead architect on the restoration of the Marrow House, a historic hotel property that would relaunch me from senior associate to a name people recognized, my first instinct wasn't pride. It was fear, a small, familiar tightening in my chest, like my body already knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I remember sitting at our kitchen island that evening, my laptop open, my hands actually shaking as I read the offer letter for the third time. 6 months of project lead. A byline in 3 trade publications. A raise that would have made my mother cry. I heard Derek's key in the door, and I felt my whole body light up, not with joy, but with the specific electricity of a person about to ask permission for something she has every right to have. "You're not going to believe this," I said, sliding the laptop toward him as he set down his bag. He read it. I watched his jaw work the way it did when he was deciding how to feel about something before he let himself feel it. 6 months, he said slowly. Lead architect. That's a lot of travel, Elena. That's late nights. Who's going to be here? Here for what? I asked. And even as the words left my mouth, my stomach dropped because I already knew. For us, he said like it was obvious. For dinner. I don't know. For our life. A wife should be home, El. I'm not trying to be old-fashioned. I'm just saying, marriages need a person in them. An anchor. I laughed, because I thought he was joking. He didn't laugh back. I'm serious, he said. You already work 60 hours a week. This would make it worse. I need my wife home sometimes. Is that so terrible? I want you to understand something about me at that moment. I had spent 11 years being an excellent anchor. I had rescheduled my own promotions around his work trips. I had hosted his clients, remembered his co-workers' kids' names, quietly absorbed every emotional weather system that passed through our house so that he never had to. And in that moment, sitting in my own kitchen, holding the best professional opportunity of my life, I felt something in me go very, very quiet and very, very still. I already accepted, I said. It wasn't true yet. But I said it like a door closing, because I needed to hear what it sounded like. His face changed in a way I'd never seen before. Something cold sliding down over something familiar, like a shade being pulled. You accepted without talking to me? I'm telling you now. That's not the same thing, and you know it. His voice had dropped quiet and clipped, which was somehow worse than yelling. This is a marriage, Elena. You don't just make unilateral decisions about our life. It's my career, I said, and my voice cracked in a way that embarrassed me. It's not a decision about our life. It's a decision about mine. Everything you do is a decision about our life, he said. That's what marriage means. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to him in the dark, listening to his breathing even out into sleep far too quickly for a man who'd just had that conversation. And I stared at the ceiling with my heart doing this uneven, panicked thing in my chest, like it was trying to warn me about something my brain wasn't ready to hear. I kept replaying his voice. A wife should be home. And the strange thing was, it didn't even sound like something he'd made up on the spot. It sounded rehearsed. It sounded like a sentence that had been sitting in him for years, waiting for the right provocation to come out. 3 days later, I signed the contract with Vantage. I didn't tell him beforehand. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office, engine off, hands trembling so badly I had to set the pen down twice before I could make my signature legible. It felt less like claiming something and more like jumping off something. I remember thinking, with a kind of sick clarity, this is the moment. Whatever happens after this, this is the moment I chose myself. When I told him that night, he didn't yell. That was almost the worst part. He just went very quiet, set his fork down very precisely, and said, "Okay. Just that. Okay." And then he got up and went to his study and shut the door. And I sat alone at the table we'd bought together on our 2nd anniversary, staring at a plate of food I couldn't eat, feeling like I'd just detonated something I couldn't see the size of yet. For the next few weeks, Derek was polite to me in the specific, chilling way people are polite to someone they've already begun grieving. He answered my questions. He didn't ask about my day. There was a distance in our house now, a held breath, and I told myself it was temporary, that we'd talk it through. That 11 years didn't just evaporate over one fight, however bad. It was on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd had a client call that ran long and I was rushing to grab my charger from Derek's study before an evening meeting that I found the first crack. His laptop was open on the desk, still logged into his messages. I wasn't looking. I want to be honest about that. I've turned this moment over in my mind 1,000 times since. And I know I wasn't snooping. I was reaching past the screen for the charging cable tangled beneath it, and my elbow bumped the trackpad, and the screen lit up, and there, right there, mid-conversation, impossible to unsee, was a thread with a name I recognized from his office holiday party. Priya. I told myself to look away. My hand actually hovered over the trackpad to close it. But then I saw my own name. Elena's being insane about this hotel thing. One message read, like actually delusional. She thinks I'm the bad guy for wanting a wife who's present. My stomach dropped so fast and so hard that I actually put a hand against the desk to steady myself. My throat went tight, the way it does right before you cry, except I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood there, frozen, reading. You deserve someone who actually prioritizes you. Priya had written back. You always talk about how much you do for her. I know. I've thought about it a lot lately. I think I stayed too long out of guilt. I sat down, not in the chair, just down onto the floor of his study, my legal pad still clutched to my chest, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my ears. Too long out of guilt. 11 years. 11 years of rescheduling my life around his, and in his own words to another woman, it was guilt, not love. Guilt. I scrolled further before I could stop myself. And that's when I found the part that changed everything. The part that turned a wounding discovery into an evidence phase, into proof of something much colder than an emotional affair. I moved another 4,000 out of the joint account into my solo one Derek had written 3 weeks earlier. The same week I'd signed the Vantage contract. If this blows up, I want a cushion that's just mine. She doesn't check that account anyway. Smart, Priya wrote back. Better safe. You never know with people. I read it 3 times before the words fully assembled themselves into meaning. He hadn't just been hurt by my decision. He had started, quietly and deliberately, preparing for an ending, moving our shared money into his name, days before he'd even told me he was upset, weeks before I'd even signed anything. He had decided something about us before I ever made a single choice of my own. The wife should stay home. Conversation hadn't been the beginning of a crisis. It had been a test, and somewhere in me, underneath the shock, a terrible clarity was starting to bloom. I hadn't broken anything by taking that job. I had simply stopped agreeing to be small in time to see what he'd already decided to become. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking back to the kitchen. I remember the front door opening, Derek's keys hitting the bowl by the entryway, that small domestic sound that had meant home to me for 11 years, and now made every muscle in my body go rigid. "Hey," he called out, like it was any other evening. "Smells like you didn't cook. Long day?" I was standing in the kitchen doorway when he rounded the corner, and something in my face must have stopped him, because his easy expression faltered. "Elena? What's wrong?" "Too long out of guilt," I said. I watched every color drain from his face in real time. "What?" "That's what you told Priya, that you stayed with me too long out of guilt." My voice was shaking, but I didn't stop. "And that you moved $4,000 out of our account so you'd have a cushion if— what did you call it? If this blows up." "Lena, you went through my phone." "I went through nothing," I said, and my voice cracked wide open on the word nothing. 11 years of holding myself together splitting right down the center. "Your laptop was open. I saw my own name on the screen, Derek. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To see the man I've built a life with talking about me like I'm a problem he's managing?" "You are being incredibly dramatic right now," he said, and something about the coldness of it, the practiced dismissal, made the tears I'd been holding finally spill over. "I am not being dramatic. I am standing in my own kitchen, finding out my husband has been quietly planning to leave me while telling me out loud that I'm the one destroying our marriage. Which is it, Derek? Was I supposed to stay home, or were you already halfway out the door before I signed anything?" He didn't answer that. That silence told me more than any answer could have. "I want you to leave," I heard myself say, and my hands were shaking so hard I had to press them flat against the counter to steady them. "Not tonight. I mean this. I want a divorce." "You're going to throw away 11 years over one bad week?" he said, and his voice had gone loud now, finally, the anger surfacing. "You're the one who signed that contract behind my back. You're the one who chose a job over your own husband." "I chose myself," I said. And for the first time since I'd found that laptop open, my voice came out steady, which apparently was never something you wanted me to be allowed to do. We didn't speak again that night. He slept in the guest room. I lay awake in our bed, the bed we'd bought together, the bed I would sell within the year, staring at the ceiling, my chest aching with a grief that had no clean edges, because it wasn't just grief for a marriage. It was grief for 11 years of believing a version of myself that had apparently never fully existed to him. A wife should be home. I understood now that what he'd really meant was, a wife should be smaller than me. And I had spent over a decade being exactly that, so gracefully that I'd almost forgotten there was another size available to me at all. The divorce took 4 months. It was quieter than I expected and lonelier than I feared. Derek moved out within 2 weeks, into an apartment 2 miles from the house we'd shared, and the last time I saw him in person before the paperwork was finalized, he looked at me in the parking lot of our lawyer's office and said almost gently, like he believed it, "You could have just stayed home, Elle. None of this had to happen." I didn't argue with him. I had learned by then that some people will never understand that staying small was never actually love. It was just the shape they were most comfortable watching you fold yourself into. I got in my car, drove 3 blocks, and pulled over to cry until my chest hurt, not because I missed him, but because I had just realized how long I'd been disappearing, one polite accommodation at a time. The Marrow House project became the thing that held me together. I threw myself into it, the way you throw yourself into anything that asks for your full attention and gives you something real back. Long days, on site, dust in my hair, my hands covered in the specific grime of restoring a 100-year-old building to something worth walking into. I found, somewhere in those months, a version of myself that Derek had never met. She wasn't smaller. She took up exactly as much space as the work required, and for the first time in over a decade, that felt like enough. 2 years passed. I want to be honest with you, they weren't cinematic years. There was no dramatic reinvention montage. There were nights I cried over spreadsheets for no reason I could name. There were mornings I woke up in my new apartment, alone, and reached across the bed out of habit before remembering there was no one there to reach for. But there were also mornings I woke up and felt quietly like I was breathing my own air for the first time in a long time. The Marrow House opened to critical acclaim. My name was in those trade publications, just like the offer letter had promised. I made partner at Hollis and Vane the following spring. I had built, slowly and without fanfare, a life that was entirely mine, which is why the phone call in early autumn caught me so completely off guard. I was at my desk, reviewing plumbing schematics for a renovation in the Old Mill District, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I get a lot of cold calls from contractors, but something made me pick up. "Elena, it's Nathan." Nathan Calloway. My stomach did something complicated and immediate, a hot, confused lurch, because Nathan was Derek's older brother, and I hadn't spoken to him since the divorce was finalized. And hearing that name come out of my phone felt like being handed a photograph of a life I'd already boxed up. "Nathan," I said carefully. "It's been a while. I know. I'm sorry to just call out of nowhere like this. I got your number from my mom's old contacts. I hope that's okay." A pause, and I could hear the specific discomfort in his voice, a man working up to something he'd rehearsed. "I need to ask you a favor, and you have every right to say no." I remembered Nathan mostly in fragments. At family dinners, quieter than Derek, always the one who noticed if someone's glass was empty before they had to ask. He ran a small custom furniture and woodworking studio on the edge of town, Calloway and Sons, a business their late father had started, and that Nathan had kept alive mostly through sheer stubbornness and skill. He and Derek had never been close, not in the easy way brothers are supposed to be. I remembered, actually, a specific dinner years ago where Derek had made a comment about Nathan wasting his potential with his hands, and Nathan had just quietly excused himself to the kitchen, and I had followed him out there under the guise of getting more wine, and we'd stood together for a few minutes not saying much of anything, and it had felt, even then, like a small kind of solidarity. "What's the favor?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "My mom's restaurant? You remember the diner on Birch Street? The building's failing inspection, structural stuff, wiring. The whole thing needs to be brought up to code, or she loses her lease. I've got the woodworking skills for half of it, but I don't know the first thing about permits, load-bearing walls, any of the architecture side." I asked around, and everyone I trust in this town who actually knows what they're doing pointed me back to you. He exhaled, and I heard something roar underneath the practical request. "I know this is asking a lot given everything. If it's too weird, I completely understand." I sat there for a long moment, my pen hovering over the plumbing schematics, my heart doing something quick and complicated in my chest. Part of me wanted to say no, purely on principle. Some old, tired part of me that still associated the name Calloway with $4,000 quietly moved into a solo account. But another part of me, the part I was still getting to know, was already picturing his mother's diner, the cracked red vinyl booths, the woman who used to slip me an extra slice of pie every time I visited, who had cried at my wedding, and, I'd heard secondhand, had also cried at my divorce on my behalf. "I'll come look at it," I said. "No promises beyond that." "That's more than fair," he said, and I could hear the relief loosen his voice. "Thank you, Elena. I mean that," I told myself, driving to the diner 3 days later, that this was purely professional. I told myself that as I parked, as I walked in, and the bell over the door gave its familiar chime, as Nathan came around the counter to meet me with his hands jammed nervously into his jacket pockets, taller than I remembered, a little more weathered, sawdust still faintly visible on the cuff of his flannel. "Hey," he said, and there was something careful in the way he said it, like he was handling something fragile. "Thanks for coming. Show me the damage," I said, and he laughed. A short, surprised sound, like he hadn't expected me to be so direct, and something in my chest loosened at the sound of it. We spent the next 2 hours going through the building together, him pointing out the sagging beam in the back kitchen, me running my hands along the wall studs, checking the wiring panel, taking notes on my phone. He asked good questions. He listened when I explained things instead of nodding along the way Derek used to, half present, waiting for his turn to talk. At one point, kneeling together in the cramped back office checking a water-damaged support beam, our shoulders bumped, and I felt a jolt of something I hadn't let myself feel in 2 years. Not longing exactly, but a kind of startled recognition, like my body remembering it was allowed to notice someone. "You don't have to do this for free," he said, as we stood in the parking lot afterward, the autumn light going gold and low behind him. "I mean it. I'll pay you your normal rate." "I'll think about it," I said, which was my way of saying I already knew I wouldn't take his money, but wasn't ready to admit how much I wanted to help. "How have you been?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that made it clear he meant it. Not the polite, glancing version of the question, but the real one. "Good," I said, and then, because something about standing in that parking lot with him made honesty easier than usual, I added, "Better than I expected to be, actually." He nodded slowly, and I watched him choose his next words carefully. "I want you to know, I never agreed with how he handled things. Any of it. I should have said something sooner. I didn't, and I've regretted that." My throat tightened unexpectedly. "You don't owe me an apology for your brother's choices." "Maybe not, but I still wanted to say it." He met my eyes, and there was a steadiness there I hadn't expected, a kind of quiet dignity that felt like the opposite of everything I'd learned to brace for. "You deserved better than being told you should just stay home." I didn't have an answer for that. I just stood there in the gold light, feeling something in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Over the following weeks, what started as building inspections became something else, slowly, carefully, the way trust rebuilds after it's been broken, not in a rush, but in small, deliberate additions. I'd stop by the diner to check on permit paperwork, and he'd have coffee waiting, black, the way I liked it, which meant he'd noticed and remembered. We'd sit in a back booth after the dinner rush, going over blueprints, and somewhere in the margins of those work sessions, we started talking about other things. His father's death, the years he'd spent resenting his own hands for being good at something the family didn't consider real work, my years of shrinking myself into a shape someone else had approved of. "Can I ask you something?" he said one evening, weeks in, the diner empty except for us, the neon sign in the window buzzing softly against the dark outside. "Sure. Does it feel strange, us doing this?" My heart gave a hard, nervous thump. "A little," I admitted, "but not in a bad way. I don't know, in a way I haven't figured out yet." He nodded slowly, turning his coffee mug in a small circle on the table. "I like spending time with you," he said, quiet and careful, like he was setting something breakable down on a table. "I want to be upfront about that, but I also don't want to rush anything. You're still figuring out who you are without all that. I don't want to be another person who takes up space in your life before you've had the room to breathe in it." I felt tears prick unexpectedly at my eyes, not from sadness, but from something like relief. The strange, disorienting relief of being seen by someone who wasn't asking me to be smaller for his comfort. "I like spending time with you too," I said. I need this to be slow. I need this to be something we build, not something that happens to me." "Then that's what it'll be," he said simply. "We wait. We don't make it messy. Whatever this becomes it honestly, or it doesn't become anything at all." We shook on it, which made us both laugh, and something about that small, silly gesture, his hand around mine, warm and calloused from years of woodwork, steady, in a way that made my pulse hitch, felt like the first real promise anyone had made me in years. For a while, that promise held. We saw each other once, sometimes twice a week. We talked on the phone some nights until one of us fell asleep mid-sentence. He came to the Marrow house one afternoon just to see it, and I watched him run his hand along the restored banister I'd fought for months to save, and he said quietly, "You did this." like it meant something to him beyond the wood and the joinery, like he understood exactly what that railing had cost me to preserve. I felt something in my chest crack open, warm and frightening, the specific vulnerability of being truly witnessed. But nothing good in this story arrives without something trying to take it apart, and ours came, predictably, wearing a familiar face. It was a Sunday afternoon in November when Derek showed up at my apartment, unannounced, his jaw tight in that old, familiar way that used to make my stomach drop before I even knew what he was upset about. "Nothing told me," he said before I'd even fully opened the door. "About you two. About the diner. About all of it." My pulse spiked, a hot, defensive rush. "There's no you two that's any of your business, Derek." "He's my brother," Derek said, pushing past politeness straight into anger. "You're my ex-wife. Do you have any idea how that looks? How humiliating that is for me? Humiliating for you," I repeated, my voice going flat and cold, the way it had that night 2 years ago in our kitchen. "You moved money out of our joint account before you ever told me you were upset. You told another woman you stayed with me too long out of guilt, and now you're standing on my doorstep worried about your humiliation?" "This is different," he snapped. "This is my family." "You're trying to insert yourself into my family." "I'm not trying to insert myself anywhere," I said, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and fury I hadn't expected to feel again around him. "Nathan reached out to me. I helped his mother with her diner. That's the whole story. And even if it wasn't, it still wouldn't be your business. You gave up the right to have an opinion about my life the moment you decided I should be smaller than your comfort." He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, and then he said something that landed like a slap, quiet and precise. "You'll do to him what you did to me. You'll use him the same way you used that job to leave me." I felt my whole body go cold. "I never used anything," I said, my voice shaking now, not with weakness, but with the effort of holding something enormous behind my teeth. "I built something for myself for the first time in 11 years, and you couldn't stand it. That's not the same thing as using someone, and you know that. You've always known that. It's just easier to believe I'm the villain than to sit with what you actually did." He left without another word, and I closed the door and slid down against it, my legs suddenly unsteady, tears coming hot and fast, not because he'd hurt me exactly, but because some old, tired part of me was terrified he was right. Terrified that I didn't know how to want something good without eventually breaking it. The escalation didn't stop there. Derek, apparently unwilling to let the matter rest, went to their mother. I found out later, from Nathan, his voice tight with a controlled anger I'd never heard from him before, that Derek had told her a version of events designed to wound, that I'd manipulated Nathan, that I was using the family's grief and guilt over the divorce to get close to him, that I was, in Derek's exact words, doing to Nathan what she did to our whole family. Nathan showed up at my apartment 2 nights later, and I could see, even before he spoke, that something in him had shifted, not away from me, but into something sharper, more resolved. "My mother asked me to stop seeing you," he said, standing in my doorway, his jaw tight, his eyes tired. My heart plummeted, a sick, familiar drop, the specific vertigo of watching something good start to slip. "Nathan?" "I told her no," he said, cutting through my rising panic before it could fully form. "I told her that Derek doesn't get to write the story of what happened in his marriage and expect the rest of us to just perform it back to him. I told her I'm 39 years old, and I get to decide who I spend my time with, and that the woman standing in front of her, the one who spent weeks helping keep her restaurant open for free, the one who never once said a bad word about Derek even when she had every right to, is not the villain in this." My eyes filled instantly, my throat closing around something too big to swallow. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said, stepping closer, his voice softening now, the anger draining out of it and leaving something raw underneath, "because it's true. And because I'm not going to let my family's guilt over Derek turn into another reason for you to shrink yourself down to make everyone comfortable. You've done enough of that. I watched you do it for years before I ever had the nerve to say anything, and I'm not going to be one more person who asks that of you." "What did your mother say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's coming around," he said. Slowly. She loves Derek, and I understand that, even when I don't agree with him. But she also remembers who you were at every holiday for 11 years. She remembers who cried with her, Elle. That doesn't disappear just because Derek's angry. I stood there, shaking, feeling something enormous and unfamiliar settle over me. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific, disorienting feeling of being defended by someone who had nothing to gain from it except the truth. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice cracking. I'm scared that everyone around us is always going to see this as messy, as some kind of scandal. Maybe some people will, Nathan said, reaching up to brush a tear off my cheek with a gentleness that made my breath catch. But I'm not interested in building something around what other people think is clean. I just want to build something honest with you, if you'll still have me after all this. I will, I whispered. And when he kissed me, finally, after weeks of careful, deliberate patience, it didn't feel like a betrayal of anything. It felt like the exact opposite, like something being built correctly, slowly, on ground that had actually been tested. The weeks after that were not without difficulty. Derek tried, twice more, to insert himself, once through a mutual friend who called to check in a way that felt suspiciously engineered, once through a terse email accusing me of destroying his family the way I'd destroyed our marriage. I didn't respond to either. I had learned, slowly and expensively, that some people will always need a villain in their story in order to avoid becoming the villain in someone else's, and I no longer needed his understanding to know my own truth. Nathan's mother, Ruth, came around exactly the way Nathan had predicted, slowly, and then all at once. It happened on a Thursday evening in December, when I stopped by the diner to drop off the final inspection paperwork, the building officially, finally, brought up to code. She was wiping down the counter when I walked in, and she set the rag down, looked at me for a long moment, and then walked around the counter and pulled me into a hug so sudden and fierce it knocked the breath out of me. I should have called you the day that divorce was final, she said into my shoulder, her voice thick. You were the only daughter-in-law I ever had who actually asked how I was doing and meant it. I let my son's anger keep me quiet too long. I'm sorry. I cried then, right there by the register, the bell over the door chiming as a customer walked in and quickly, tactfully, walked back out to give us the moment. You don't owe me an apology, I managed. But thank you. I'm not apologizing because I owe it to you, Ruth said, pulling back to look at me, her eyes fierce and wet at once. I'm apologizing because it's true, and because my son. She glanced toward the kitchen where I could hear Nathan working, the familiar sound of him laughing at something with the line cook. My son has been happier these last few months than I've seen him since his father died. I'm not going to be the reason that ends. Spring came, and with it, a kind of settling. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind, but the quiet, daily kind, the kind that actually lasts. Nathan and I moved slowly, deliberately, exactly the way we'd promised each other in that empty diner months before. We didn't move in together right away. We didn't rush any of the milestones people expect a story like this to rush toward. We built it the way he built furniture, carefully, with attention to grain and weight, and the specific way two pieces needed to be joined so they'd hold under pressure, not just under admiration. There was one more test that spring. A smaller one, but it mattered. Derek called me, out of nowhere, in early April. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer, a kind of curiosity about what closure might sound like. I heard you and Nathan are serious, he said, his voice quieter than I expected, none of the old sharpness in it. We are, I said simply. There was a long pause. I was wrong, he said finally, and I could hear how much the words cost him. About all of it. The job, the way I talked about you. What I did with the money. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I was wrong, and I'm not calling to ask for anything. I needed to say it out loud to you once. I felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't realized was still tight. Thank you for saying that, I said, and I meant it, even though it didn't change anything, even though some doors, once closed properly, are meant to stay closed. I hope you find whatever it is you actually need, Derek. I mean that. I hope you're happy, he said. And for the first time in years, I believed he meant it too. I hung up the phone and sat for a long moment in the quiet of my apartment, feeling the specific, unfamiliar peace of a wound finally closing, not because someone else had stitched it for me, but because I had done the slow, unglamorous work of healing it myself, one honest choice at a time. A year passed. Then another. I want to take you somewhere with me now. Somewhere that matters. Somewhere that closes this story the way it deserves to be closed. It was a Saturday in early autumn, almost exactly 3 years after that first phone call from Vantage Hospitality Group, and Nathan and I stood together in the newly restored lobby of the Marrow House, the building that had once been the thing I'd thrown myself into during the loneliest months of my life, now standing exactly as I'd fought for it to stand, the original banister gleaming under the lobby's restored chandeliers. Nathan had built the reception desk himself. A slow, careful project he'd insisted on doing personally. Months of work in his shop, the wood sourced from a fallen oak on his family's property, the same property where his father had taught him to work with his hands. You know, he said, running his palm along the edge of the desk he'd built. I used to think this place was just a job for you, something you threw yourself into because you were hurting. It was that too, I admitted, leaning into his side, the late afternoon light pouring gold through the tall restored windows, exactly the way it had the day I'd first shown him around this project. But it was also the first thing I ever built entirely on my own terms. No one telling me it should look different, no one telling me I should be smaller to make room for someone else's comfort. He turned to face me, his hand finding mine, steady and warm, the same calloused hand that had shaken mine that first night in the diner when we'd promised each other we'd take this slow. I love that about you, he said. I loved it the first day I watched you walk through this building like you owned every square inch of the air in it. My eyes filled, that familiar tightness in my throat, except now it wasn't grief. It was something so full it almost hurt to hold. I love you, I said, the words easy now, unguarded, nothing like the careful, sentences I used to measure out to make sure I never took up too much space. I love the way you built this desk like it mattered. I love the way you defended me to your mother before I even knew I needed defending. I love that you never once asked me to be smaller for you. I never will, he said. And then he reached into his jacket pocket, and I watched his hands, steady in every other context, capable of joining wood so precisely it looked seamless, shake, just slightly, as he opened a small box. I know we said slow, he said, his voice rough with something I'd never heard in it before. And I meant that. I still mean it. This isn't me rushing anything. This is me telling you that after 3 years of building this carefully, on purpose, with both of us wide awake for every step of it, I know exactly what I'm choosing. I'm choosing you, not the smaller version anyone ever asked you to be. All of you. Exactly as you are. I said yes, standing in that lobby, under the chandeliers I'd fought to restore, beside the desk he'd built with his own hands, in the building that had held me together during the loneliest season of my life, and now stood as the backdrop to the happiest moment of it. I cried. And he cried a little too, though he'd deny it if you asked him. And somewhere behind the front desk, Ruth, who had come along under the pretense of wanting to see the finished project, let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a cheer, because of course she'd known. Of course she'd been there the whole time, quietly, fiercely, in my corner, exactly the way she'd promised she would be. I think about that night in my old kitchen sometimes, the one where a man I loved told me a wife should stay home, and I signed a contract 3 days later that he never got to approve. I used to think that was the moment my life fell apart. I understand it differently now. That was the moment it finally, for the first time, became mine. Have you ever had a moment where choosing yourself cost you everything you thought you couldn't live without, only to hand you back a life that actually fit? I'd love to hear your story in the comments, whatever shape it took for you. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.